showing you the big screen here. You should have concepts to think about up on your screen, I hope. Great. Okay. So these are some of the things I'd like you to, the ideas that have been applied to women and men and, you know, our experience with each other. And women, of course, have tended to be seen, at least through most of history, through the eyes of men. And consequently, of course, the men, since both of us are so in need of one another, tend to see us as how we affect them. Sure. And therefore, women have a tendency to be put down into the pit. She's evil, she's, you know, the snake, she's dangerous, you know, or she's put up on a pedestal. She's sublime, she's fabulous, and it probably depends on how well you're doing with your love life. Speaking of that, that one of the concepts that I do work with is the notion that there are really only two basic emotions for both sexes, and that is the basic love and fear, which sometimes turns to hate, particularly if you're terribly afraid and feel powerless.
Gail, I'm going to pause you for a minute so that I can mute everyone, and then you'll unmute yourself.
Okay.
Although I think I can, yeah, if you would unmute now.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Can you hear me all?
Yes.
Okay. So that, of course, has led to the famous war between the sexes. And I think that part of this war is because the essential, immutable part of being mortal and conscious is that we love sex, we hate sex, and we love, or we don't love death, but we fear death. And so that's probably because we're mortal and we're conscious. The fact that we know we're going to die. We don't know, of course, what other animals think, but there seems to be a historical aspect to being human where from 6 or 7 years on, we know that we are mortal in some way, that we're going to, and that makes us very frightened. The power of the female is the power of life. She's the one who brings the life forth. She's the one who nourishes it in her womb. She still needs a power. I mean, she still needs a male to fertilize her. So that's the sex part. But the power of the male throughout history has been the power to wield death. Now, both sexes obviously can wield death. And when we were back in the times of the goddess, you could see there was male sacrifice and that whole life, death, life thing, which we talked about in the former weeks. But the fact that men were more powerful, had to go out and hunt our dinners down and learn to make weapons and use them, gave them an inordinate amount of power over death. The bridge between these two is the bridge of love and the bridge of sex. And sometimes it's coupled and sometimes it's decoupled. And of course that creates for all the drama that we've been looking at here and we'll continue to look at today. Another thing I'd like you to hold in your minds as we move into these last two parts of the ancient history, the Hebrews and the Christians, are that there are symbols and ideas that are attached to women and men, and particularly to women in this case, because that's what we're looking at. And these symbols will be both revered and reversed, okay? And depending on what it is you're trying to get away with or teach or learn or be a part of. So again, we have the tree. The tree is a goddess symbol, and it goes way, way, way back, thousands and thousands of years, well before civilization as we know it. And of course, we will meet it today. It's still going to be right there, front and center in the Garden of Eden as the forbidden tree. So a lot of people who haven't had any women's history might not realize that the forbidden tree in Genesis is the goddess's tree. And what is being forbidden here, of course, is the knowledge of the goddess. And then the fruit of the tree, right? The fruit of the tree, the apple or the pomegranate. I think modern scholars think it was a pomegranate, but we're so used to the apple, but it doesn't matter. Both of them have both this great flesh that will feed you and the seed within that will continue life on. Now, in the Bible, this apple again becomes the forbidden fruit. And the reason that it is forbidden is because it makes one godlike or goddess-like, I would suggest. And what do we mean by that? Well, God is creative and creator, and God is also the all-knowing one. So knowledge and fertility are at the very seat of the notion of power. Okay. And then we have the bull, the sacred consort of the goddess. And here we can see symbol reversal, or the golden calf, because what the golden calf was the pagans, who were in conflict with the Hebrews. It was one of the things that they worshiped. It was the bull still left over here, but to the pagans, to the development of Hebrews and their culture and their thought, it had to be reversed. And so it became, of course, idol worship. So to worship the golden calf, and guess what? Those people in Canaan and Judea and all that area were mixing it up and stealing from each other and fighting for hundreds and hundreds of years. And then finally, of course, we have the serpent. And the serpent, remember we already saw the serpent as the symbol of the goddess. It's hidden knowledge. The hidden knowledge, or the power of knowledge. Because if you know things that other people don't, people have often realized, they realized fairly early on, thousands of years ago, that knowledge is power. And if you can keep that power to yourself and others don't know it, you can have a great power over them. So what do we do with the serpent in the Bible in the period we're looking at now? We flipped the idea of it and made the serpent the evil bringer of loss. So, or in a more positive frame, you might say the pain and the power of being conscious, of consciousness. So all these things are big ideas, and they are affected by who's thinking them and who's writing about them and whose story it is. Okay, so I want to move on. So let's move on to the Jews, the Hebrews. In the early Bible and in the Jewish culture and in Christianity, that ambivalence toward women and the inability to control them, somewhat as we have the inability to control life, death, life, which is a pain for us since we know about it, made the Jewish women be viewed sometimes as the Rose of Sharon, that ever so beautiful, delicate, numinous goddess, or the gateway to the devil, right? Boy, you go for that and you are done for. We know about the Hebrews because of the Torah, the Hebrew sacred book, which was inspired by God. And we find most of the stories of this also in the Christian Bible in the Old Testament. The Torah part has the story of Genesis and Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And these stories reveal to us a great deal about how this people's, one of the reasons I think that the Hebrews are still so powerful, they were not powerful in the ancient world. They were kind of constantly bumped from pillar to post, and they had to move out of here and move out of there because more powerful folks had to. They fought a lot, but they didn't win very often. And so this information about them in a way is wonderful to us because it gives us a choice to see what happened to the little guy, back there in the ancient world. And to a large extent, the Hebrews were the little guy. However, they told their stories, and these stories were written in the middle of the Agrarian Revolution, which would have been from 3000 BC to about 500 BC. And this is the period of time we're going to be looking for. What was going on during that time where they lived was the development of farming, the beginning of the control of water, and big civilizations, which were better and good at, well, controlling the water, right? And like the Egyptians on the Nile. Farmers need fertile land, and this is also the change from being largely hunters and gatherers to farmers, and it takes hundreds and hundreds of years. They learned how to domesticate animals, and that allowed them and caused them problems. Of course, it allowed them to keep that meat source nearby, so they didn't have to go way out into the world and try and find it. But it also allowed some of the people who were also domesticating to live on the fringes of the society, because animals, unlike plantings and such, can move right from fertile place to fertile place. So this is the geography that we are talking about, the place. And you can see down here that we're in Egypt. You have this wonderful, huge fertile plain, a long river with lots of fertility on either side, and one of the very earliest of the really outstanding civilizations. In this context, the Bible writers were herders, okay? They were out on the edges. Here's where Canaan is, okay? And there's a lot going on between the Hebrews and the Canaanites in the Bible. They're fighting over this land. They also had conflict with people who were polytheists, and the Canaanites were among those, and they were occupying the best land. So how do you whip up people and give them the courage to go against the more dominant sources of, where's my little guy here? Oh, here we go. They were losing, you can see there's a nice river here, right? And a lake. This is pretty fertile land, and it's near the sea, but nevertheless, these folks were polytheists. They had lots and lots of gods and goddesses, like most people we've looked at. And of course, they were, how you're going to get folks to risk their lives going up against what was over and over a superior military force. And so what the Hebrews had going was they created consciousness with the writing, and they wrote it down. So they told myths and stories like everybody did, and they began to write it down. So they are the people of the book, the people of the pen, mightier than the sword. Now, the first proletariat, according to Marx and many other theories, was woman. That is, the women had to go out and do the hard work while the men were sitting around figuring out how to write this book. So one of the characteristics of Hebrew society is that the men are priests, and they write down the book. And so they are taking over the body of knowledge. So, and they see that as their superior weapon. And it is, it turns out to be. We probably wouldn't even know of this rather nomadic and not very strong tribe of people if they hadn't agreed that in the beginning was the word. So it's all about literacy. In The Alphabet versus the Goddess, one of the books I recommended, Leonard Schlein takes on the possibility that symbols and pictures versus abstract knowledge or abstract language allowed for things like symbol reversal, and also may have rewired our brains, because there's a difference between the right-brained, holistic goddess, mostly goddess-based thinking that is symbol dependent. So when we dug up all those graves, if you remember way back when I started this class, what they found were goddess figurines, lots and lots and lots of them. What they didn't find was an explanatory text as to who they were. That's why we call it archaeology and not history, right? Because history begins with the written language. Well, history, obviously, in the general sense, right, that we use it, doesn't begin with the written language. But history begins with the written language in this sense, this part of history. So you need to write it down generally. When we teach history, it has to be within the written period, right? That's why I went out and ended up in areas that I have absolutely no business in, but I was so fascinated by it that I just went there anyway. So you have to have a little rebellion if you want to do something new. So the symbol reversal that I talked about, the understanding of pictures, why we say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and it is, but sometimes it's hard to agree on what words it's worth, because you don't you can disagree about that. But this was Schleyn's idea. The literate power in the hands of men led to something that is still true today, and that is that scholarship was huge for Jewish men. So as they emerged from their culture of being just, illiterate herders into the ancient world, they were set up for what would come for the next 3,000 years or so. And in the beginning, the only people who could read at all were pretty much, well, if you looked at hieroglyphs, they're complicated, or the Chinese language, it's very complicated. So before the alphabet, not too many people could read, right? Only the very high priests, okay? The tragedy of human consciousness is one of the things that fuels religion. And what we're going to be talking about today is a great deal about religion. And point of view, of course, that is who's looking determines which beliefs prevail. Wait, let me see, where am I? I haven't got a number here. I'm going to move on and see. Sorry, my Garrett, we didn't get numbers on here. I'm back to this. Oh dear, where am I in this place? Let me just I just want to take a quick look. That is where I want to go. Okay, so here is the herder. So we have the herders against the farmers in a way. The farmer and the cowmen should be friends. Well, they've been fighting for a long time. Why? Well, farmers want to fence in and keep everybody out of their hard-won, work on the land, while the herders want as much space as they possibly can to run their animals around whenever the, geography and the weather determine where we want to put them. And this has an amazing impact on the Hebrews and the Christians. The Hebrews are willing to use their swords, but they're just not very good at it. So here they are in a place like this, which is just teeming with other people, many of whom are better than the Hebrews at using the sword. So they got to find some other way to stake their claim. The Christians will use the sword later, but early on, they are poor, dispossessed followers of a highly unlikely king. So fighting with a sword is probably not going to work very well, unless we consider the lingering ideology of the sacrificial king, which, as the Christians developed their theology, they rejected. So we also have here an issue of monotheism versus polytheism. And generally, the polytheists were very dominant during the period that we're looking at. In order to be the dominant people of the book, then, who had to be vanquished was the goddess. Okay, vanquished by the sword, well, yes, but also vanquished by the word. Okay, I think I would just remember that I can just, oh, yes, I can. Okay. Okay, let me go back just a minute here. So this is where we get the Rose of Sharon, the Jewish women and the Hebrew goddess. There were Hebrew goddesses, okay? This is why it took so much effort to vanquish them, okay? That's what is being spoken about in the alphabet versus the goddess. And how are we going to vanquish them? Well, we're going to have to tell a better story. Why am I there? There. Thank you. Oh, no, I'm going backwards. How'd that happen? Oh, I see. Sorry. Thank you. There we are. That's where I wanted to go. This is Asherah. She was the main goddess of Canaan. But what they generally try not to tell us is that she was adopted by the Hebrews, who were living in the same area. And this became a nemesis for the patriarchs and the priests. In order to get dominance of the word, right, over the symbol, in order to get dominance of men over women, they had to get rid of this goddess. So there's a big battle for monotheism. She was the mother of all gods, and she dates back to 1750 BC, which is way before the writing of the Bible. Well, maybe only 400 or 500 years, depending on, which scholar you're talking about. But, that's a ways, a few generations. So when the leaders and the prophets railed against idol worship and demanded allegiance to a single male god, Yahweh, it was the goddess and her images that they were smashing. It's an indirect attack by saying, well, we're only doing this for you. I'm only thinking of him. There is also Astarte. She was also adopted by the Hebrews. And the Hebrew name for her is Anath or Ashtoreth. And she was the principal goddess of the Phoenicians. So the Phoenicians were kind of on the other side, right? So these are where the people have been mixing with each other as they travel back and forth looking for the good life. There's a lot of backsliding among both sexes, rebellion, fighting. It doesn't all happen that easily, okay? For instance, in the book of Judges, the chief priest owned an Asherah. Oh, I should go back here for a second here. And his son Gideon, who was an early zealous Yahwehist, those boys will rebel, was a reformer, and he demolished it. And the men of the society he was in demanded his death, and he was saved only because the chief was his father and defended him. So now he's kind of caught between his family, and the society. Many household goddesses of clay remain. I'm having a hard time with this because, just a second here. This isn't where I want to be. There we go. Like Anath, Ashtoreth, and she is the goddess of the Phoenicians. She was also a love and war goddess. And in fact, what happened when the prophets tried to destroy her? Or because they had no images of Yahweh, or both, okay? Solomon's temple was built similar to the other pagan temples in the area. Oh, damn it, I am so sorry. I want to talk about Lilith first. Lilith is Adam's first wife, but most of the references to her have been expunged from the Bible, or she switched. She is the demon itself in the Talmud. Okay, so the Torah is the first book, the Talmud is the second, and by the Talmud, she has become evil. She is a symbol of the perils of sex, and that's why she's seen as so dangerous. So we have the dualism, right? Love, fear, sex, death, the battle of the sexes, game on. In the beginning was the Word, and the human condition was examined. And she she's still around everywhere, right? So in Genesis 1, it says, and you've still got a certain amount of equality between the sexes. If you read Genesis 1, God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Excuse me, I'm just going to have to stop that. And so you can see that in this first story, we still have male and female together. Okay. In Genesis 2, the story is embellished, and it shows the Bible as but it also shows the Bible as a wonderful examination of the human condition. So what? We got problems here right from the get-go, right? How are we going to change the society we've had going for thousands of years and get total dominance over the women? Did the women just go down easily? No. In Solomon's temple, there was room for lots and lots of gods and goddesses. And one chronicler reproached him for not being a wholehearted worshiper of Yahweh. Now, he was not as whole, that is whole of a worshiper, as David, his father. But David was the warrior, and if you remember, he was also a big philanderer. Solomon was the wise. Now, all kings had multiple foreign wives with their polytheistic religions, and of course, that gave Solomon a certain reason for maybe perhaps wanting to work both together. So, David or Solomon, which would you choose? Well, let's talk about Eve. Adam and Eve is in that story, right? Genesis 2. And it's a long, hard fight. At first, she is a scapegoat. She did it. She ate the apple, right? And what have we got here? Look in this picture. This is a classic picture of Adam and Eve from the Renaissance. And you can see we've got the tree of life. We've got the apple or pomegranate, and of course the now evil, symbol reversal, snake that is tempting her. Okay. And then there's Jezebel. You know, the trouble with love and sex is that it's really pretty attractive. And how do you get rid of it while still maintaining the fun and the procreation, because your group isn't going to grow if you don't have any of it. Okay? In 873 to 852 BC, King Ahab married a Sidonian princess, Jezebel. Okay? And at that point, love and sex were not holy, or were changed. Who's trying to change it? Well, the men of the Bible who are writing it are trying to change it. But he built an altar to Baal. Now that's what makes her evil, right? Is because that was among her gods, and he loves her, and she's beautiful and sexy. And there were 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah at Jezebel's tables and temples. So the goddess needs to be vanquished if you're going to dominate over here. And here she is right in the middle of where you live. So therefore we have symbol reversal, right? Canaan was their constant enemy, and the Canaans worshipped the bull, right, via the golden calf. And so we go back and forth with the kings and the prophets installing and removing the goddess from the temples, even in Judah. And they had to convince people that goddess worship is an abomination, right? To do it is going to get you straight to hell. Idols, then, one of the things that is often not taught in Western civilization, and was never taught to me, is that idols were mostly female fertility goddesses. So this inveighing against idol worship in the Bible is a kind of code for get rid of the goddess. You've got to get rid of the goddess. That's the goddess, of course. Astarte Anath. I don't know how to pronounce that. She was found in Phoenicia, Egypt, and many of the lands as the great god's mother. And her all-lord, the bull, guess what, resided in Heliopolis. She's mentioned 9 times in the Bible, 40 for Asherah, the love and war goddess, the virgin or maiden, both wanton and pure. Now, how are you going to have it both ways? We humans really like that. We want it both ways. Her stories are vivid. There's an explicit sex story in her sacred marriage in Canaan. It's familiar to the stories I told you before. People reject Jeremiah's blame for the latest catastrophe on falling away from Yahweh, not because they reject religious sin as the cause. As said, as for the word that you have spoken to us in the name of Yahweh, we shall not listen to you, but we shall without fail do everything as we said. We shall burn incense to the Queen of Heaven and shall pour her libations as we used to do. We, our fathers, our kings, and our princes in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem. For then we had plenty of food and we were all well and saw no evil. But since we ceased burning incense to the Queen of Heaven and to pour her libations, we have wanted everything and been consumed by sword and famine. So it didn't seem to be a very good life under the new prophets. This is obviously a Renaissance depiction of Lilith. Lilith was Adam's first wife, but she refused to lie with him. She refused to lie under him, and she had the gall to run off. She said, "Why should I lie beneath you when I am your equal, since both of us were created from the dust?" She becomes the most famous she-demon. What are we going to do with a powerful goddess who won't knuckle under? Well, you make her into the picture of evil itself. And by the time of the Talmud, which is the 2nd to 5th century AD, she symbolizes the perils of sex for men when women are free. Can't stand that, right? She is, of course, promiscuous, and she bore all sorts of children who were also demons. He couldn't control her or his progeny. Though it's only one reference to her in the Bible. But by the end of the Talmud, under the Kabbalistic mysticism, Lilith was more widespread. She was more important. She was born before Adam, but she made of filth, not good, clean earth. So how are you going to do this? We've got to turn this really good thing into a really bad thing, because otherwise we're just never going to get rid of her. She is the free, sexy female. And like Pandora, she is blamed with bringing all the evil into the world. She seduced men while they slept and killed children. And of course, a free, sexy woman is anathema to monotheism and to patriarchal control. She has to be vanquished somehow. So the dualistic split of women's sexual power and women's loving maternal power is at the heart of the struggle of the Hebrews, and later, of course, of the Christians. So the matronate, the good, pure woman, everything wondrous about sex and love, is the Rose of Sharon. But Lilith, the bad, the evil, powerful, unbridled sex, everything that is dangerous about sex, of course, is the evil one. Which brings us to the Sabbath, which originally was a feminine force. Like most of the cultures in the area, the Sabbath was on Friday, the beginning of rest and the holy celebration of nourishment and making love. The weekend, it's been around a long time. The marital act in paganism was holy. There was no reason to be ashamed of it. It was seen as good, and nothing could keep you from it. In fact, if you did withhold yourself, you were seen as failing in your worship of the goddess. It was later turned into evil, even punishable by death, to violate the Sabbath. The Kabbalistic Sabbath is pictured as female. Keeping the Sabbath, she describes herself. I am the delight of males and females. In me rejoice the old and the young. Later, we will hear it said, how sweet is your rest, O you Queen Sabbath. Let us hasten toward you. Come, O anointed bride. How very human were these ancient Hebrews, struggling brilliantly with longing for love and power and somebody to blame for the messes. So let's look at the women. Who are the women? Well, Sarah is the faithful wife of Abraham. She is very beautiful, but barren. Famine forced them to Egypt, where the Pharaoh noticed her. And of course, that's dangerous when the Pharaoh notices your wife. Okay, so to save his own life, Abraham pretended to be her brother so she could be a concubine for the Pharaoh. Sarah allowed her slave, Hagar, to bear a child to Abraham. Now, eventually, the deception was recognized and she was dismissed and they returned to Canaan. So that was kind of a good thing. I'm talking about Sarah's deception. Anyway, in the meantime, they're having a pretty good time in Egypt, and he is much liked by the Pharaoh because of his beautiful sister. And finally, when he realizes that, instead of killing them all, which sometimes would have happened, he didn't. He allowed them to go with slave children, all the goodies he'd heaped on Abraham, and they went back to Canaan. Sarah and her slave, who had borne a child, but guess what happens when a woman bears a child in this society? She becomes dominant or more significant, right? She's bringing the all-powerful only son. And as a result of that, Sarah began to resent Hagar, who resented her. And finally, she threw her out into the desert, and with her son, get out from here, because God had allowed her to have her own son, even though they were both about 100 years old. So, this proves, of course, that God is all-powerful and mystical and can do the impossible. And this is Hagar, of course, getting then sent out into the wilderness. Rebecca, also revered for her beauty, bore twin sons. But the two parents favored different sons. Rebecca, when her husband was very old and blind, fooled him into giving his blessing, which came with his inheritance, to the wrong son. And so you can see the women are not exactly, just being pawns here, handed around. They're actors in the story. Then we have the sacred harlot. Well, she didn't start out to be a harlot. This is Tamar. She was married by Judah to two sons. First, the first one died and without heir, and then the second one died without heir. And then he decided, well, that stinks. So she thought he would give her his third son, but he wasn't willing to try that. So she was stuck with no status in a family that didn't love her, and so she was sent back home, and there she pretended to be a prostitute. And she seduced Judah. Then she became pregnant with twins, and to be accused of prostitution in the Hebrew tradition was a death sentence. He wanted to have her burned. But because she had been a crafty prostitute and gotten several items of his, she pointed out to and proved to him that he was the father. So here is his only two legitimate sons, and she's got him, trapping him into keeping her in the family and saving herself. So you got to be, one of the things that I learned when I was growing up is that if you're a woman, you had to learn to be manipulative. I found that terribly distressing because I'm not any good at it. But you can see that those women who were willing and able to manipulate whatever their circumstances were often saved themselves and their children. Now, a very beautiful and loving wife, ultimately the beloved wife of Jacob, was Rachel. But she got into this marriage and thing with another deception. Her husband, or her husband-to-be, Jacob, went off to find himself a wife, right? Of course, where else in Canaan? And he found a beautiful girl that he wanted to marry. But of course, that girl had a father, and in order to let her marry him, he had to work for 7 years. So he had to bring a bride price. And so he did. He worked for the father very hard for 7 years. And then when it was time for him to marry, his father-in-law slipped her older sister, Leah, into his bed. So here we have Leah and Rachel, the younger sister, obviously, and the older sister. And that, of course, ticked him off, but by this time he'd laid with her, and they were, and therefore she had been ruined, and he had to, as an honorable man, he could still have more than one wife, right? Because we're still in polytheism. And as an honorable man, he had to keep her. But the father was willing to let him have Rachel if he would work another 7 years. So the poor man had to work for 14 years to get himself a couple of wives. But by that time, it had been a good life, and he'd done well. And he had 12 children with the 2 women and a couple of the slaves they had. So Jacob had 12 children, and thus the 12 tribes of Israel that God had promised would be multiplied was created. Now, this is a person I didn't really know about until I started doing this study, and her name is Zipporah, and she was the first and beloved wife of Moses, and she was a Midian, and that means that she was black, and she's the only one of the black features you see in biblical paintings and such. And then, of course, there are those wicked women who actually did continue to practice free sex as they saw it, and they are seen as the evil seducers in the Bible. There is, of course, Delilah, who conned Samson out of his strength. And I think we've already talked about her. Jezebel, the Phoenician princess, who is married to King Ahab of Israel, and brought along her Baal, her gods, all of those things, and conflicted with monotheism, and actually had a lot of the prophets of Yahweh killed because she didn't think much of them and their insistent and, of course, damning monotheism. Then there's Bathsheba. King David fell for her beauty and began an affair with her. The only problem was she was married to one of his best generals. And so, again, women are constantly being called significant because they're beautiful. And of course it does help if what you're wanting to do or needing to do in order to make your way in the world is be sexually attractive to a man. Anyway, David got in trouble because she was back at court, and while Uriah was away at the battles, he got her pregnant. And when he found out she was pregnant, he thought, oh dear, now what am I going to do? So he called Uriah back. And because he had to show, they did kind of know, that you can't have a baby without a man, and that, it takes about 9-10 months, to have one. So Uriah was not fooled and therefore had to be killed. So David sent him back to the front of the front lines where hopefully he would be killed, and sure enough, he was. So the birth of Solomon, which came from her, Bathsheba, mother of Solomon, is a result of an illicit affair, a marriage after the fact, and a murder. Then we have Deborah. She was the only female judge in the book of Judges. She was a warrior as well, a leader who recognized that unless the Israelites joined up, they were never going to be able to vanquish that Canaanite army. The Canaanite army was stronger than general, but she thought if we could get them all together, all the 12 tribes, we might be able to stand a chance. But as is often the case, not all of them came to the fight. But since she was special and she was holy, God intervened, saving the day, because the chariots that the Canaanites had, they were like tanks. So it'd be like, you're going with sticks and stones against the local tanks. And but God came along with a big storm, miring their chariots in mud, and then the Hebrews came in and slaughtered them. And then we have the Queen of Sheba. This is one of the few of the women that we find both in the Bible and in the Quran. She had a tiff with Solomon over whose throne is greater. So she's a queen in her own right of Sheba, which was a rich and mighty place. And that's why you see her depicted here, somewhat like Cleopatra, right? With all her gold and all her jewels and a really splendid throne. So Solomon and the Queen of Sheba fought over whose throne was best. And Solomon even had his throne redone and everything to try and prove that he sits upon the throne is more powerful. Well, he couldn't succeed in getting it better than hers, so He invited her for a visit, and like Cleopatra, she wows him with her oriental splendor. But the Bible has her being wowed by his God, so everyone is happy. Once again, we can put people together, and as long as you're still polytheistic, that works pretty well. But if you're monotheistic, it doesn't work too well. Another warrior heroine is Judith. There was a great war with Babylon, and the Jews again didn't stand a chance of winning against Nebuchadnezzar's general, Holofernes. She, of course, was a beauty, and she actually was a widow who had been in mourning for several years and loved her husband, apparently, but finally decided when she realized, oh my God, we're just going to all be slaughtered, I better do something. She dressed the part, she dressed herself up in her finest, and she and her maidservant slipped through the night into the camp of Holofernes, where she was taken prisoner along with the maidservant, but she managed to talk to him and impress him for 3 nights, and then finally he decided he was going to sleep with her, and so she had to kill him. But first she drank him under the table, and once he was, thoroughly loaded, she beheaded him. Then with his head in her laundry basket, the 2 women slipped back through the lines and then sent his troops running by showing off what happened to their leader. This picture, by the way, was painted by, there's a whole bunch of them, Artemisia Gentileschi. And she was an unusual woman in her own right, a painter, when people met women didn't paint. But her father was a painter, and she learned the craft. She also, as a young girl, however, was raped. And in those days, he took it to court. The father's the only one who could do that, but he took it to court. But it was an awful ordeal. In the rape court, of course, they accused her, and etc. And so she was a bit out for revenge. And in her painting career, she did a fair number of pictures of the murder here of Holofernes, or the killing, the wonderful heroic killing of Holofernes, depending on which side you're on. Does evil depend on the point of view? And we have Esther. Esther is the queen who saves the Jews of Persia. Of course, she was another extraordinary beauty, and the king of Persia set aside his first wife for her, which was great for the 2 of them, but not so good because the Persian court was very envious, of course, of this foreign woman who came in. And Haman, one of the Persian son generals, plots to kill all the Jews of Persia. Now, this is huge if you think about it, because Persia encompassed a huge area. And I want to let you know about, let's see if I can find this here. Where's Esther? Esther. Persia at that time was the greatest empire, at least in the Western world. It had an unprecedented level of peaceful coexistence and commercial activity, and it encompassed what is today Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Israel, Jordan, and Lebanon, as well as Russia. Not only that, but also Armenia, Afghanistan, and much of Central Asia. By some estimates, the Commonwealth embraced some 50 million people. And so here she is coming in, and for her beauty, wisdom, or whatever it is, sexiness is elevated to the top of that pyramid as the queen. And so she found out about the plot in the Persian court to kill all the Jews in Persia, and she told her husband, and he was so true to her that he had both Haman and his sons hanged, but the massacre was already underway. So the king allowed the Jews to bear arms to defend themselves. And today the Jews celebrate the Feast of Purim by reading the book of Esther. And that pretty much concludes looking at the Hebrews. So let's pop out and see if you have anything you'd like to say.
Don't forget, you'll need to You will need to unmute yourself if you have something to say.
Yeah, anybody got anything to say about this, or questions or additions?
Yes.
Yes, Irene, tell me.
No, I'm noticing that with one exception, virtually all the women you referred to were foreigners. I think Bathsheba would be the only Jewish woman there and you obviously the ones later you're talking about.
Yeah.
But why would it be that that there were no Jewish women for the Jewish men to want? Why did they always have to want foreign women?
Well, that's a great question. I think that one of the things we have going, just a second, is that when the people are writing this book, they're nomads, right? They're wandering all over the place. They are herders. They are outside of the agrarian revolution, which is taking place in the richer areas. So, of course, they admire and are attracted to a lot of the people who have this higher status, but they also resent them. So how do the establishment of the Hebrews, as these are all Semitic people, right? The establishment of the Hebrews as a major people really came by their kind of claiming the power of the pen. So I don't know for sure why, but my guess is that there was lots of mixing and mingling, and up until fairly far into their history, they were not monotheistic, nor were they monogamous. And so they just liked whoever was most attractive and or most sexy. Also, you've got a problem is when they try to keep the women monogamous, then of course, and they're trying to keep them 1-to-1, then the women are uppity and they don't automatically go along with the program, which is what I was trying to show you. Does that help any? I don't know why they always...
No, just to say, I never realized it before, but it does strike me as so strange that all the problems arose from the fact that the men were going after pagan foreign women instead of marrying the women of their own tribes.
Yeah, well, some would say that all the problems are caused by the men trying to have dominance, over the female of every group.
You say,
yeah, what else?
There's no comment on that,
right?
I can remember, in the Bible on the fact that they are all lusting after the foreign women and not settling for their own monotheistic women.
Well, that's a problem too, though, is that, monotheism and monogamy don't come natural in that time and that place, right? It goes against what's going on there, which is polygamy and polytheism.
Could it also be a question of property? In other words, if you marry a princess of another culture, do you therefore also acquire her lands, or would you share more as a result of that?
There is a lot of within the ancient world. There's also a lot of, remember the Egyptians, matrilineal. So you've got patriarchy combined with matrilineal. If you think again, we've got these conflicting, right, things as the various cultures evolve. And a lot of times you end up with men getting the power, right, the kingship or the power of the pen or whatever, but they don't have the power of the land, which goes with the goddess and the females. So that's another reason, yes, inheritance. If you want to get in there and get your sons, to have the wealth, et cetera, and turn it, you have to do it through several generations. So it helps to have a matrilineal line with the land, which was true of much of Canaan and otherwise. Margine, you got to unmute yourself.
Okay. I just wanted to go back to your early chart where you talked about how women symbolized birth and the apple and the seeds, and men encompassed death because they went out to battle. But I think also, the very moment of coitus has also been talked of as a little death.
Yes.
And I think that's also part of that masculine I wouldn't call it a myth, but the story about men and death, women in life and men in death. I agree with that about war and them going off to war, but I also think that's part of it too. And I think, so many women throughout history, women have been blamed for men's sexual urges. And certainly in many countries now, that's why women are all covered, because they excite the men. So we have to cover you. So, and anyway, that's all I want to say.
I think you're right on there. And also, if you think about life, which requires birth, and death, the bridge between them is sex. And so there's both lust sex, and of course there's love sex. And it is one of the dominant characteristics of humans. And the fact that we're conscious of it is part of the reason we have to have religion and other things like that. So I would agree with you. And if you remember in the life, death, life version of the old cultures, which were significant throughout all this period, well into the biblical times, that usually there was the sacred marriage. And the sacred marriage involves sex. And if you remember, it not only involves sex, sometimes it involved lots of sex with everybody. It kind of depends on the culture. But mostly, when the priestess and the high priest and priestess, or the king and the high priestess, had coitus, they did it sometimes in public as a part of this big, what later Christians and Puritans and others, orgiastic culture, but it was holy to them. It wasn't an abomination. So not only that, but when you said the sex has a tendency to attract people regardless of their marital status. And so the need to try to both to create monogamy, right? But ultimately, of course, we got the sexual double standard, right? It was monogamy for her. And how are you going to do that? You've got to control her. And is she going to submit easily? My reading of all the stuff about the goddess and those cultures, no way did she submit easily. She, but so it was a death sentence, right? If you got in trouble. And so she fights back. And so she's not a very good, pure woman for monogamy if she's going to go out there and act just like him. So you've got a double standard that they're trying to enforce. And of course, power over that, being in love and being in sex, either one, both make us vulnerable, both people.
And also just physiologically, you cannot tell when a woman is necessarily horny, if to use a crude word, and you can always tell when a man is feeling sexual.
And that's a vulnerability too, right? Unless you turn it to your advantage. Right, unless you turn it to your advantage. And then there's the possibility that, and so for control, I think human beings really suffer, I know I do these days, from a lack of control over their lives. And we are aware of it, right? And we don't have much say. And so one of the easy ways out of that is blame somebody else. So having a scapegoat's always handy, and women have often been that, But if you think of the human character, our human dilemma, and that's what brings religion, right, to a large extent, is our knowledge of both our desire, right, our desire for each other, and our desire for sex, and our desire for love and connection, and the ultimate fact that we're going to die. We're going to die. Oh my God, we're going to die. And so how do you deal with that? So we create some wonderful mythology and all kinds of stuff trying to cope. Gunther, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, you mentioned consciousness, and I wonder whether the Torah somehow explains consciousness.
How do you think that? I mean, what is it you're thinking?
Well, I mean, I ask myself, where's consciousness coming from?
Right.
And I just wonder whether the Torah has an answer to that.
Well, I think actually all of the ancient writings and understandings are trying to wrestle with that. All of them do, because that's the central dilemma. We have.
Yeah, we don't know.
We don't know, and also, though we are conscious.
Yeah.
That's a bummer.
Yeah, it's,
It is. Okay, anybody else want to chime in there? Constantine.
I have kind of a funny theoretical question to you and the group. So, as things are going these days around the world and here in the United States, looks like more women are gaining power in terms of political power and otherwise. So, in that essence, do you think that this problem of monogamy, too much sex and stuff, will start to trickle down in terms of allowing it because of that?
Well, I have a brief answer, and then maybe some other people will chime in. I think that it's already happened. You know, the notion of
Absolutely.
purity, but it's fairly limited, and it's now still under onslaught, right? In the Christian and in the rest of the community in general, because more and more women are just, if they have their own means, right? If they have, we have had an expansion in the possibility for women to have a say, and in so doing, they have become intolerant, not necessarily of monogamy, but of the sexual double standard. You know, okay, honey, if you're doing it, then it's me. I have a chance. I'm doing it too, and you know, the only way to stop them from that is to immure them in a castle, right? Require them to wear chadors, which we're getting to with this pandemic, and try to hide them, you know, force us into, I mean, a chador is a perfect thing to wear, right, for the pandemic. You can just go around like, yeah, you're completely covered, etc. But modern, at least women in Western civilization, are reluctant to allow that sexual double standard, but there's still a long ways to go. Margine, you want to say something about that?
I agree that it's already here, and I would just say, look at any movies, and look at any. I've been watching something from Australia. It's a TV show serial, and it's called Offspring, and it's these young 30s, and all they do is jump in bed. And the fact of the matter is, I really do believe that our media is our children's models. I really do. And I was recently talking to my grandson, and he's turning 21, and he related to me that his best friend's girlfriend is pregnant, and his best friend has 2 jobs. And I said, well, are they getting married? Oh, no, they're not interested in getting married. And the fact that he would admit that to me really blew me away. I mean, when I was that age, I mean, I wouldn't even talk to my mother that I was having sex, let alone just throw off to my grandmother that I think it's already happened in terms of,
Right.
If not our generation is catching up.
Well,
but
the sexual revolution came in our lifetimes, not the first. Right. I would hope you'd be getting when you look at the history we've been looking at, right? I mean, it's a sexual revolution against our, you know, what was put upon us through many hundreds of years. And so that was certainly part of it. And of course, decoupling love and sex, which has been at least attributed to men, right? That was their thing. You know, they just want to be able to have sex with anybody they please. But you remember, they also wanted to be fathers, and they wanted a mother. And so there's a difficulty here. And when we just decouple love and sex, you can end up with some pretty bad situations for the next generation. And that's why many of the modern, you know, religious people are fighting so hard against what they see as modernism, you know, and I can understand that. I think it is a problem too. Yeah, it's Susan.
Well, but of course, since the mid-60s, birth control has been available, and quite a lot more successful than any previous methods.
Mhm.
So it gave women the freedom to not be afraid of getting pregnant. Now, it seems actually quite stupid to me that there are so many educated young women under the age of 30 who manage to get pregnant anyway and have no intention of marrying the person who is the father of their child, because there still is the raising of that child. And someone has to not only pay for it, but someone has to have the time to be a parent. And if single women don't have so much time, so
Well, that is the dilemma, isn't it? Because
there is a problem there, but the freedom has been around for, well, at least since the 70s.
Well, actually, it's been around since long before that. People in the very ancient world had the acacia leaf boiling, which was the same as Delphin foam. People have had ways of preventing pregnancies, not always successful, for very, very long. But that is I think that's an inherent problem with love, sex, and procreation. You know, is that usually you do end up with children if you go at it long enough. And if women want to claim that I can just enjoy sex regardless of who it is, and they don't have birth control, that's another issue. Who's in control of the birth control? And that will be fought all through the rest of Western civilization up until today, and it's still a problem. But it's certainly less of one for women, given our modern scientific life. So, but that is the fact, that we have children are often a product of both love and sex. And so who's going to take care of them? And who's going to pay for it, right? Constantine, you want to add something? And then we'll take a little break.
I think that's exactly the point, the hard point. Our societies haven't matched our new ideas about sex. And so we have a very poor system of taking care of children who are out of wedlock or otherwise. And so if we can do that, knowledgeably knowing what it'll get us, you know, I think
this is big stuff, right?
Oh yeah, it is.
It's big and it matters.
It does. It does.
So, and it certainly affects both sexes, but mostly it affects the women, and that's the reason.
I disagree. It affects the kids mostly.
Well, yes, the women also. But what I mean is,
right.
It's
But
easier for the man to walk away, and did, you know, or to have a dozen wives and they take care of the children, etc.
Right.
Well, listen, I'm going to take a 2-minute break here, or 5 at the most, and then we'll look at the Christian side of this, okay? So if you want to talk amongst yourselves or whatever, just give me a break to get some water, and we'll move on to the Christians, okay?
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to say something about the current situation for Jews, and I'm not a practicing Jew, but some Jewish people have been interested in Shekinah, which is the study of the female in Judaism and how to return to a balance between the patriarchy and the matriarchy. And I was just wondering if anybody in this class today would know more about that. Any comments? Any Jewish people, perhaps? Well, at any rate, there does seem. Go ahead.
Can you spell that word? You said
Shekinah. Well, it's actually written out in Hebrew, but it would be transliterated to S-H-E-N, S-H-E-H-K-I-N-A-H.
okay. Okay, thank you.
It's probably something you can look up online to learn more about the movement among Jewish people to bring back the feminine.
Is that among Orthodox people or any particular group or?
Most likely, this is a guess here, but I think the Reform people, there are 3 main kinds of Jewish groups right now. And the reason why is that somebody mentioned that that was of interest to somebody at Temple Bethel, so but they're Reform. So I don't really know what's going on there, unfortunately, but somebody just mentioned that to me.
I'm wondering if I can see everybody. It seems like, okay, there's only 19 of them. Okay, maybe I can.
Gail, are you familiar with the concept of Shekinah?
I'm only familiar with it that I know the name and, you know, that that's a part of the Jewish women's movement. But I think it goes back way, way before that, but I'm not very familiar with it.
Oh.
Okay, so if I may share my screen with you again. Oops, that's not what I wanted. No, stop that. No. Dang it. No. What the heck? What's going on here? There. Okay. I want to go over here. Okay, now I'm still learning the process of Zooming. Okay, I want to share my screen. I want to share this screen. Okay. Do you folks see Christian Women, Holy Virgin, and Gateway to the Devil?
Yes, very good, Gail.
Good, thank you. Okay, so we're going to take a look. Obviously, Christianity is backpacks on the Old Testament, and it's later in the period of the Hebrews. But as you can see here, the picture of the women is pretty much still the same. Holy Virgin or the gateway to the devil, the good girl and the bad girl. And the one is not sexy and the other one is, but we still have to have children. So how are we going to do all that?
Right.
Well, a lot of politics and a lot of culture is about power. And there's lots of different kinds of power. And some of them lend themselves more to men than to women, or at least they do in the history we're talking about, in the period of time of the life that we're talking about. So the first kind of power that is possible for either sex and is self-mastery or charisma. That's a personal power. People have or don't have it, regardless, but anyway, that is the chance to have an effect on other people just by virtue of who you are and who you become. There is, of course, the physical power. And again, both sexes have that, the power to kill or the power to create. But the killing power is obviously better, easier to accomplish if you're bigger, stronger, you know, a warrior. And of course, one of the ways we've handled this in the modern world, and of course have been handling it since the ancient times, is technology, right? If you've got a better sword, then you're better off defending yourself, unless you happen to be David with a really good slingshot. So then there is the power of sexual power. The power of sex is both pleasure and procreation. And anyone who can master the pleasure part of it, if they aren't constricted by cultural limitations, which of course greatly has been applied to women, but that doesn't mean we can't have sexual pleasure, and it doesn't mean we can't provide sexual pleasure. So people who know and are willing to learn how to provide pleasure can have a great advantage over perhaps someone who finds them desirable but wants to dominate them. That, for instance, was one of the things that Cleopatra used. There's also, of course, the obvious procreation part of sexuality. And when she creates, unless she is owned by a man, when she provides, she is the mother. And as the mother, the procreator, she brings forth life and has had a mystical power in much of Western civilization. There's another power, the economic power, which is control of resources and the status that goes with it. And then there is, of course, what we talked about, people of the book, the knowledge power. Now, anybody can have knowledge who goes after it, but if you can control the means of getting it, the book, the ability to read, any kind of place where you can go to learn it, you can have power over other people. If you know something that other people don't know. And women have wielded this occasionally. The snake goddess, for instance, the notion of the snake goddess has been traced that she knew how, that is the priestesses did, knew how to inoculate themselves against the deadly power of the venomous snake. And therefore, they could handle snakes and wow the people. So knowledge is huge. We even have the phrase, knowledge is power. Then we have institutional power, and that is, of course, what politics it deals with, and that is the rule maker, right? If you can make the rules, you can win at every game. All you have to do is be the one who makes the rules, and it multiplies all of the others above. And then there is also metaphysical power. That is the power of the spirit, or the power of the soul. And a lot of it hinges on overcoming the fear of death. If you're not afraid of death, you can have a lot of power over other people, and you can have a way of living in a world which is deadly or frightening or all kinds of things. So the power of prayer, the power of metaphysics is also significant, and that's what we've been looking at here. Okay, now the environment, of course, also has power over us, and where we live and how in the world, we're small little people, you know, where we live and what kind of an environment, what kind of a geography is there, will have a great deal of influence over what choices we have and we can make. Now, Jesus was born into the Hellenistic world. Remember, Alexander the Great had conquered a great deal of the world of his day, certainly the settled world of his day. And Alexander's mother claimed that he was born from she and God, not Philip, remember? This is one of the sneaky advantages the female has, is she may be the only one who knows for sure who the father is. That's one of the vulnerabilities of the men, unless they can completely physically control the females, which they have tried mightily to do. According to Alexander's mother, she slept with a large python, and not Philip, and that's who gave Alexander his great powers. Unfortunately, he was tutored by Aristotle, who was no friend of women, but he did advocate the spread of power, democracy, which made Alexander somewhat of an enlightened ruler. The Roman Empire is the empire into which Jesus and all of the women of the New Testament were born. The Roman Empire had a pagan pantheon of gods, mostly taken from Greeks and just renamed. They were kind of like modern Americans. They weren't real religious. They were polytheists, obviously, and that gave them the opportunity that whenever they conquered a new place, instead of having to fight the religious fight, they could just adopt a new god or goddess or marry the two to theirs. And so that, I think that I would say that polytheism is a lot better system of religion for a conquering group because it's a lot easier not to have to deal with, and these people have become, in the way of the Hebrews, right? The monotheists who insisted that their God was the one God and everybody else was wrong. There are multiple claims of supermen throughout all of ancient mythology being born from God and a woman. And of course, that's one of the things. If you're going to appear on earth, you may be able to do without the man, at least as far as you think he knows, but you can't do without a woman. It's got to come through somebody. So all these super people like Zeus was always philandering, right? And Pluto in the Roman. Hera, the once great goddess, is turned into a scolding wife because she can no longer have much power over him. The Romans also practiced all sorts of mystery cults and adopt lots of the practices of the areas they invade. Like the Greeks, they are nominally religious, but mostly they're earthy. War and engineering was their big rule, but of course war definitely both kills off, but also gives the power to men. Men tend to rule in warring societies throughout the ancient world. And they tended to persecute anybody who didn't agree with them. But they were perfectly willing to accept the cultural standards of a lot of the people they conquered. And consequently, they really aren't anti-Hebrew until the Hebrews get really stubborn, or the Christians come along and they persecute them too. Why? Not because they really cared who you worship. They didn't. I mean, Jesus was just another God for them. But they did care if you were going to come out and say that they were wrong and that was a justification for taking over from them. They hated the rebellion. So then we get to the story, the official story. We have a hard time coming up actually with the official story, but the story that we know of from the New Testament was written 2 generations after Jesus' death, somewhere between 70 and 120 CE. There is really scanty historical proof that he even existed, and there are scholars and others who insist that he didn't. But there is lots of proof of the power of belief and the significance that the story of Jesus has on the Western world. So you can't really study Western Civ without studying the Christians. So the study, the faith of millions, the culture was monotheism. And it grew in the place where the people of the book lived. And the law declared that Jesus was the Son of God, born, of course, of a pure woman and God. Now, this is very familiar, right? We've had all these heroes, all these significant folks who are born of, and why do you need a pure woman? Well, then God can't necessarily be the father, if there's some other guy there in the woodpile. So, and then the issue, of course, was one of eternal life. We just hate that life, death, life. So one of the great myths, many societies besides ours, is that you can achieve eternal life, but it was obvious to any thinking person, and there were plenty of them, that the body decayed and it disappeared, and you're left with the bones, etc. So how in the world could you do that? So the mythology or the story of being able to go out and come back again, it was rife in that area. It was rife with the Egyptians. You remember their story. It's not different from the dying god-king mythology of the ancient Near East that we looked at. And we find similar stories of heroes, demigods, and others in that whole culture all around the Mediterranean, of people being born of God and a woman. Now, another aspect that the Christian stories bring in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are of miracle working and being able to do things that are beyond the power of physical mortals, and yet that Jesus lived here on the earth. And of course, that has been much edited. The whole stories have been, this is one of the stories of Jesus walking on water, right? Stepping. I want you to know I have a puppy who walked on water the other day. He climbed onto the cover of a friend's swimming pool and ran all around the top of it. And we had to pull him out of the water. He was good and wet, but he was happy. So there are a lot of folks who disagree about the Gospels, and there were people of the era, or at least back in the ancient world, who saw them very differently. And among these were the Gnostics. And that's spelled Gnostic if you want to look it up. They were in that same era, and their ideas were declared heresy. And in Christianity, as it evolved and as it developed, that was a dying offense. So indeed, they said, in the absence of feminine symbolism for God, which marks Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in striking contrast to all of the world's other religious traditions. So we have patriarchies and such, but very rarely is the feminine goddess totally eliminated. Whether in Egypt, Babylonia, Greece, and Rome, or in Africa, India, and North America, the Gnostics included the goddess as a mystical eternal silence and incorruptible wisdom, which is what gnosis means. But the official story, of course, wouldn't have anything to do with that. The official story has Jesus as a great teacher, and he was teaching amazing. He was born of a virgin, okay, and he grew up with, kind of middle-class roots. But once he came of age, it is his teachings that triumph and create the ultimate story of Christianity. But it's also a triumph of his leadership in this small place in the world. And this is the story of him going into Jerusalem, where he, makes his last big preaching. And ultimately his torture and death at the hands of the powerful. And by the way, the powerful were not the Romans. They are the ones that crucified him, but they were more like, the policemen. And it was Caiaphas and the old Hebrew teachers whom he offended mightily by ripping up their money changing in the temple and cursing them and telling them they were doing it wrong. Nothing can get a person's ire up better than being told, you're wrong. You're wrong, wrong, wrong. And I am here to tell you so. And of course, what ultimately creates it's a mystical religion, it's not the only one, is the notion that he triumphed over death, that he rose up bodily. So he, like the pharaohs, right? He goes out, dies, but then he is resurrected in the body. And notice here that all the people who are there in the tomb, all the angels and all the women, are women. Now, how that got around was because of one of the great disciples of Christianity, who was a terrible sexist, but he was a very good proselytizer for Jesus, and that was Paul. He spread the word, and this is a map of how much he traveled around the ancient world, right? From Jerusalem. So you can see the whole northern Mediterranean is covered by Paul. He was a Jew, by the way, originally, and a Roman. Now, one of the reasons he could travel all around there is because he was a Roman citizen. And he traveled talking about, and he was a convert then. The story is that he was knocked off his horse by God, who told him to get with the story and that he had a mission to accomplish. The Greco-Roman environment, in which all the earliest books are in Greek, was highly patriarchal. Women in that environment should be veiled and keep silent in the churches. And that's what Paul says when he's preaching. Women should keep silent in the churches. If they want to know anything, let them ask their husbands at home. So he was right in line with the notion of women's domination. Now, Paul also shows the conflict between his world and Jesus' teaching, because he also teaches, in Christ there is no Jew nor Greek, no male nor female, but we are all one. So you've got a conflict going on here. Monotheism versus polytheism, oneness of both sexes, versus the ongoing dominance of the patriarchy. So Jesus, his expansion of Christianity, mostly under the leadership of Paul. So this is a lot further after him, okay? But you can see that by AD 400, this period, 200 to 400, that Christianity has spread all over the Mediterranean Sea. Now, originally, Christianity was outlawed, and you probably have seen the stories of, Christians being thrown to the lions in the great Roman Colosseums, and there are many, many, many martyrs. So another thing that brings power to the Christian faith and flummoxes everybody around them who looks at it is their willingness to die in the face of terrible persecution, which they did experience until the conversion of Constantine in 313. And when Constantine, the Roman emperor, moved to the east and converted to Christianity, then he did a typical Christian thing. He made everybody have to be Christians or else they were wrong, right? So Christianity not only became decriminalized, but it also then became the persecutors. Because with one right religion, anybody who insists on keeping their pagan gods and goddesses is wrong and needs to be either converted or killed. And now how Constantine came to be converted was that his mother, Helene, was a Christian. And he is baptized shortly before his death. Now, once official, the Christians eventually go from the persecuted to the persecutors. So by the 4th century, we have nativity scenes on sarcophagi all over, well, here and there all over the ancient world. So where are the women in this story? Where is the goddess? What has happened to her? Well, the closest thing to the goddess that we have in Christianity was Mary, the mother of Jesus. Mary, a virgin mother, well, there's an impossible ideal. An immortal woman. In order to be the goddess in Christianity, you got to be something. What, of course, she is most revered as is the maternal aspect, as the mother of Jesus. And there's so many Madonna pictures and so many churches dedicated to the Madonna that they actually exceed the Christ pictures. So she sneaks on through, you might say, the goddess, in the form of Mary. Here is, of course, a classic picture of her as the goddess, really. There she is, rising up into the heavens, the power of healing, the stars in her crown, this beautiful peasant woman. These are just a few. Here she is being crowned. Some of the greatest of Western art is devoted to Mary. Oops. I'm just giving you a few here. Now this is Elizabeth and Mary. And Elizabeth was, you can see if you look at the picture, both of them have a baby inside. And Elizabeth is old, right? And Mary is young. Okay. And how's that come to be? Well, Elizabeth is the mother of John the Baptist. And she was an old woman and expected that she would obviously be barren, and she had not child. And God came to her and said, that you are supposed to bear a child for me. So once again, both Jesus and John the Baptist are born of God and a woman, at least so the story goes. And then, of course, Mary was the virgin, Mary the Virgin. But if this all struck me as extremely ridiculous as a modern woman, right? And knowing about sex and how, I knew there was no homunculus and I didn't really believe in this mystical God. Where in the world do they get smart people who buy this. But if you think about the mythology that goes before it and all of the stories of, the greats of society and the way people thought, they were almost all, if they were men, they were almost all born of God and a woman. And so in that case, it begins to make some sense how, this kind of theory could evolve. And where do I go next? Let's see here. Okay, so now Jesus, the early Christian church, by the way, was very dangerous. There are lots and lots of women martyrs that I'm not going to go into. But, that part of the way, though, that the word spread was the fact that the women and others were so willing to be martyred for their belief made people think, well, what is it about this stuff? How come they're so significant? Another of the women in the Bible that are known, this is a picture of Mary and Martha, and it's a very important story because Jesus, as he did some radical things regarding women. And one of them was that he refused to see menstruating women as unclean. Okay, that was in the ancient world. When a woman was bleeding, she was seen as dirty or dangerous, and she often had to go back in a tent and stay away from everybody so she couldn't pollute them. The notion of blood pollution was very alive and well. Jesus refused to be horrified by a woman who was menstruating, who touched the hem of his garment. He never saw women as less than. He was a radical kind of a guy. And he dined with Mary and Martha. And these are two traditional Jewish women and young women, obviously. And when Mary wanted to sit and listen to his teachings, and Martha was upset because she was getting all the domestic chores to do, she complained to Jesus and said, well, can't you tell her to help me with all this chores? We're fixing you a dinner, or something to that effect. And he told her that studying God was more important than focusing on domestic chores. Now, why is that radical? Because he, a Jew, is giving permission to women to study. And who did all the studying in those days? It was the Jewish men, right? They didn't expect women to study. And it's also saying that put the other world ahead of this world. So this is much more radical than it may seem to us today. Now, the most interesting to me and the most radical, of course, potential woman is Mary the Magdalene. She was Jesus' closest companion. And she was the first who was visited after the resurrection. Mary the Magdalene defied the stereotype of Jewish young women. She was unwed, but an unwed woman needed a family to escort her to go out. It was seclusion, and you kept your virgins close to the belt. Yet she went around boldly with Jesus, following him and admiring him and being his helpmate. She also, which I didn't know until I started studying this, helped to provide for his group. Apparently, she was a fairly well-to-do, from a fairly well-to-do family. Nowhere in the Gospels is she seen as the sinner that she is later depicted as. She's depicted later on as a repentant sinner, but she was not depicted that way by any of the four writers of the Gospel. Pope Gregory called her a fallen woman, but Pope Paul VI finally vindicated her in 1969. Took a long time to get vindication when you're a woman. There are people, among them one of my good friends, Clista Kinsler, and the Gnostics, who believe that she was Jesus' wife. And in a novel, the book, The Moon Under Her Feet, Clista shows how she fits into the tradition of the sacred marriage and the dying king. And Jesus could fit as the dying ultimate king who rises again. Some think that she may have been the high priestess of a small town, and we have now found that there is a place that's been considered to be or defined as Magdala So she also could be just Mary of Magdala. There's a lot we don't know of her, but Magdalene also translates the high place. So she could have been a priestess of the goddess, and that might have explained her, willingness to go around and do things that ordinary women didn't do. She was the first to witness the resurrection, and she stayed with Jesus when all of the other disciples fled. So she was at the cross and at the resurrection. So some feel that of all the women in the Bible, Mary the Magdalene, who was much reviled, had to be reduced. They tried to turn her into a whore, some way to get her demoted. There's also some of this, we'll never know because archaeology is constantly growing, but there has been a portion of the Gospels that has been unearthed in our lifetime called the Gospel of Mary. And so it's, of course, now in the church for adjudication as to whether it's real or not. And then there's Salome, of course, the openly evil woman, or so they say, and the dance of the seven veils. The Bible presents this as a vulgar striptease performed by Salome to please the king Herod. But actually, it was an integral part of the sacred drama depicting the death of the surrogate king, his descent into the underworld, and retrieval by the goddess, who pays with one of her garments at each of the seven gates into the underworld. So you'll find the stories of the seven gates and the descent into the underworld in Inanna. You find it again with Persephone, all through ancient mythology that preceded this period. And so the notion of if you remember, again, if you flip the notion that sex is holy, not evil, and you flip the notion that nudity and marriage to the king is a rite of sacred passage, and you take the seven gates down into the underworld to save the Savior, then you have an entirely different story from the one that we hear in the Bible. So it does matter. What do we mean by that, right? The battle between the pagans and the monotheists, in which Salome may have been the rising king and the temple dancers, a reenactment of the life, death, life ritual. Rituals were still being created in the area where Jesus and John the Baptist were changing the old order. So what is she, this horrible murderer? Is she another Judith? Who is Salome? I think that bears a lot of examination. But what we do know is there's a great evidence of leadership conflict between Peter and Mary the Magdalene in the Gospel of Mary, which has been suppressed along with all the Gnostics who believed it, usually on pain of death. Now, obviously Christianity did not develop into a great, religion like it is today with churches and all over the world and huge wealth, etc. It began in house churches. In other words, when the people split with the murder of their leader, Jesus, and they went out and they were supposed to talk to people, but they were afraid. It was women who gave them a place to talk about their story in their homes. A house church gave women some say. This is hard to determine historically because, of course, these churches were secret. They had to be. Women acted as leaders, prophets, evangelists, bishops, and, of course, lots of them acted as martyrs. The conflict between modesty and sexual chastity increases as Christianity becomes more public. The martyr spirituality, demonstrating the great faith, glorifies suffering and guaranteed sainthood. So women had plenty of equality there. But they also were patrons and sometimes supporters. You met Zenobia before, but she was also a wealthy patron who supported meetings and leaders and helped to make the way for the Christian secrets to get out. And Monica, who converted her son Augustine of Hippo, who was one of the great intellectual founders. in his confessions, he repudiates his mistress and their children. So here he is. He's got a mistress. He's got a wife. He wants to have a wife. He's terribly misogynistic. He's a classic man of his day. And then he gets converted by his mother, and he feels horrendously guilty, of course. And so, but he weaves Aristotelian logic into the conversion that he makes. It's very misogynistic, but it also supports the ideals of asceticism and celibacy. So guilt is a big deal. And once he converted, he felt lots of it, and he got rid of his mistress, blames her, of course, she's the problem, the devil made me do it. And then he becomes an ascetic and a celibate. This is the link of sin and sex that the Christians are still wrestling with today. And it's very much a part of the time that Christianity was born in. The woman is now blamed as the temptress, right? And poor man, interestingly, poor, powerful, on the top of the heap man is done in because he can't resist her lures. So therefore, she must have some terrible power over him that must be broken. It's a bind, right? How do you love them, and how do you make love with them and not end up wrecking your belief in your monotheistic religion? Saint Jerome blames all on women. He says, make yourselves pale with fasting and penance to women, right? You should be penitent for being a woman. If men find women attractive, it's her fault. She, says Jerome, is the gateway to the devil. Well, if he's trying to be celibate and he's trying to be monotheistic, she is part of his challenge. Chastity for both sexes was the ideal. Women, like the goddess, were whores, and even if they were chaste, men couldn't resist them. Somebody had to be blamed. Virginity and chastity, by the way, was not all bad for women. The power of morals to demand chastity over being married off was employed by quite a few early Christian women. No, they wanted to stay celibate. Now, those of us who like sex and think it's a pretty wonderful thing, and especially with modern birth control and all those things, so it's not such a big deal, might think, why in the world would women want to give up on sex and be chaste? But in her day, in this day, she was the only one sometimes who was expected to be chaste. There was the double standard, and that is kind of resentful creation. Also, she might decide it would be better to be property of the church than her father or husband, especially in Roman times. Remember the pater familias, the husband or the father had life or death power over the woman. Also, if you're chaste, you don't die in childbirth. And Thecla and Catherine of Siena both chose virginity. And their families were furious and tried to get them back. Especially Catherine, tried to get her back because why? They were losing valuable property to be married off. Now, about this chastity thing and about virginity and all that, there have been struggles throughout all the rest of Western civilization, and before then too, depending on what you want to do with sex, to be chaste. It's not all that easy. Sex is a powerful force, and it's also very attractive. And therefore, how are we going to deal with it? You've got to deal with it one way or another. And so one of the ways that they dealt with it was, throughout all of this history, we have chastity belts for both sexes. If you can't do it by yourself, we'll give you a hand. Oops, pardon me, I want to go back. Not quite finished, almost finished. So another problem is that men's honor in those societies hangs on a woman's chastity. That makes them dependent unless they can control her. So men are in a bind, even loving men and men who wish to have a great relationship with the women are basically shamed if she doesn't behave herself. And not only that, but it's really limiting to your virility. So monogamy only for her was tried very hard, mostly by confining her to the home, limiting her opportunity. But the homes were full, in most of the, especially the wealthy homes, full of slaves and other attractive men. So you had to enforce your power by violence. By the 4th century, the church had become legitimate and monotheism had become powerful. Women's preaching is less acceptable, and Tertullian, of course, blames men's desire on women. He says a woman is not chaste unless she has no impact on men at all. Oh my God, talk about blaming his behavior and his feelings on her. And of course, the only way a woman can do that is, of course, to be very unattractive. Now, the trouble is, or the reality is, celibacy was really not a given. And it doesn't really get thoroughly imposed until the 12th century imposes it on the priesthood. Women are, if you want to be celibate and you're a healthy young man, then women are a clear danger to these aims. And as people develop monastic life and groups of Christians together, this became a really huge issue, and sex became defined as demonic. That would be the reason, ultimately, that women could be burned as witches for any show of power, and would be throughout the Middle Ages and even into the time of the founding of America, as we know from the Salem witch trials. There's always a sexual overtone to them. Once imposed, it only lasted a few centuries until the Protestant Reformation. And maybe, oops, not that, wrong direction. The second coming, maybe it will be soon. By 999, the year 999, thousands were sure it was coming. In the year 1000, it was going to happen. And they brought all their goods to the church, which became exceedingly wealthy, as you can imagine, and it didn't happen. So the church would go on very much enriched from the fears that the second coming was going to come and they were going to miss it. It's still an issue among what we tend to call them cultish people today, but among religious zealots. And the high power of church power, the high point and wealth, will continue and rise, and it will be highest, at least uniformly, in the Middle Ages. And with that, we'll leave the Christians. And see if any of you have a last comment or question before we wrap up this class. So Irene, so nice to see you.
Yeah, just one thing, I'm wondering what your source is for the story of Mary and Elizabeth, because the gospel version, the current gospel version does not have her as a virgin, mother to John the Baptist. Elizabeth, I'm talking about. Only Mary has that honor. In the gospel account, the angel appears to her husband, and he then has sex with his wife and has the child by normal means. John the Baptist is born normally in all the accounts I've read.
Well, I think that's far more likely, but the source in this particular case that I found was rather interesting. I wanted to recommend it or comment about it anyway, so thank you for the lead-in. This, let's see, can you see this? It doesn't really matter, but as I was getting ready to do this, I happened in Safeway to find that they were featuring this National Geographic, The Women of the Bible magazine, and picked it up because, of course, it was right where I was going anyway. And it's available for several months if any of you are interested. It's kind of fun. It tells some of the things that I've told you, of course, but and with great pictures. So I recommend it. It's not very expensive, a couple bucks. And it's available easily. Anybody else?
Is that the current National Geographic?
Well, it's a special It is current. It's in news. It says display until 1/8/21. So it should be on newsstands and available everywhere. It's not a whole National Geographic. It's a single issue devoted to women of the Bible.
Wow, thank you.
See? So you might want to take a look at it if you're still interested in those kinds of things, and see what he has to say. Anybody else?
Yeah, I've been reading the books of Bart Ehrman, and he writes about the early Christian tradition. And then I had a personal conversation with him when he gave a talk, in which he said that he thought that Jesus was probably influenced by Hinduism, which is a polytheistic tradition that has goddesses, because near the town where he was growing up, there was in that town a bunch of traders from India, and that many of the much of the Indian tradition was available to him. He was only 3 miles away. He could walk down the road, talk to to people who were practicing Hinduism about the goddess, and that might have influenced his thinking in terms of his feminist ideas, because according to Bart, there is a lot of feminism in his teachings.
I think that is true, that there is, and that at the very least he is a radical in terms of his treatment of women, and the way he approached it. And that's one good thing. Of course, we then have the development of the church, and there's two or three different things here. There's Jesus himself and what he taught, or at least what we think he taught from the books of the Bible. And then there is the development of Christianity as an institution, right? As a church, we got huge amounts of changes going on there, and still today, because of course religion is interpretive. And so yeah, I think that he was quite radical in his thinking. And there's lots of stuff to be found here. If you're interested, pick up one of the books, or go out online, and the images and such. It's really fun, and I'm so grateful for all of you for being willing to come and listen, so that I could be pushed to dig deeper again, into something I haven't done for quite a few years. So thank you so much for coming.
Well, thank you so much for offering this course for us. It was
I really loved having you. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're wonderful.
Gail, are you going to make this